Okay guys, today's the day. I want to talk to you about the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. I just finished the Fountainhead a few days ago. Atlas Shrugged I read over a year ago. But Atlas Shrugged is basically the best book I've ever read, so it's just etched into my memory completely and totally at this point, since it's such a lovable book. There's going to be some spoilers in this. It's kind of hard not to talk about it, but for those of you who were like me, who've only read one, maybe want to get into the other, I'll try to give you the breakdown. In both stories, we have main characters that are really awesome and hard to hate, but in the Fountainhead, it was really more about individuality and non-conforming. Howard Rourke is the main guy. He won't budge an inch on any of his designs. If anyone changes it, he won't bother with it, right? He doesn't compromise to whatever the people want, no matter what. Whereas that was part of the philosophy in Atlas Shrugged, but that wasn't the focus the way it was in the Fountainhead. The Fountainhead gives it a lot more focus, and for that reason, I think that the Fountainhead is a lot easier for people who don't pay attention to politics to get into. Atlas Shrugged, on the other hand, is way more of like a bashing fest, right? Atlas Shrugged is really more focused on collectivism. It's not that the Fountainhead doesn't look at collectivism. Believe me, it does, especially with Ellsworth II and people like that. But Atlas Shrugged is like really focused on collectivism and really focused on bureaucracy and government and how bad it is. And she tries to get her point across way more strongly in Atlas Shrugged. So for that reason, because there's so much more like political overtone in the book as a whole at almost all times, Atlas Shrugged is a lot harder for the normies to get into. And the Fountainhead is a lot more subtle and gentle in the way that it does things like that. Don't get me wrong, there's still moments in commentary on that in the Fountainhead, but in Atlas Shrugged, it's like very direct. It is not subtle whatsoever, right? Rather, I shouldn't say that. It's not that it's not subtle, it's just that it's way more obvious in Atlas Shrugged, and I just felt like it was way more dominant overall in Atlas Shrugged. In both books, I felt like the climax did a lot of this. In the Fountainhead, I thought that the plot was a little bit less intense the way it was in Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged had multiple moments where there were climaxes, and they were just like really intense moments, right? And it would just be like the build up. It'd be like a really like whoa strong moment of like intensity in the climax, and then it would kind of fall down. It would go back to another climax, and it would just keep hitting you with these awesome moments, right? Where like you could almost say that the book could kind of end. You're just like, man, how does this book keep going? This is nuts, right? But the Atlas Shrugged was masterful in the way that it did that, right? So overall, because I'm a very politically interested person, I absolutely love Atlas Shrugged, and for me, it's hands down the better of the two books. Realistically, I give Atlas Shrugged a 10 out of 10. I would give it a 12 out of 10 if I could. The Fountainhead was good, but in different ways, like I told you. I would overall give it like an 8.5, probably a 9 out of 10. I feel like I could give like the Fountainhead a 10, to be honest, but it just doesn't feel like it was intense enough for me to give it a 10. But the philosophies of it are consistent with my own, and I would high five Ayn Rand today if she were still alive. Fountainhead is a really good book. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I blew through it in 3 weeks. It wasn't like I was really chewing sawdust at any point. There's a little bit of a moment in part 2 of Atlas Shrugged where it does feel like it slows down, and I've seen stuff online where people said like, oh, I could have removed like 100 or 150 pages. I think that would be a little much to remove. There are definitely some things that happen there that could be a little bit more concise. Also, in both books, I felt like characters disappeared for really long periods of time, especially after they had such awesome build-ups and introductions, right? There's a few characters in here I really like that disappear. They get like 2 or 3 lines after in like the end of, close to the end of the book, and then that's kind of just like that was it. But in Atlas Shrugged, I mean, holy shit, this was like something that happened a few times, right? So it's 1170 pages. I know that you're not gonna be able to write about every single character all the time, but holy fuck, one of the characters that I thought for sure was gonna be like this very relevant secondary character, because she had so many scenes that were in the first part, or maybe it was the second part of the book, ends up disappearing for, not even kidding, about 500 pages, and she gets 1 chapter, which was an excellent chapter. She had a very introspective moment in that chapter, but she disappeared for so long, and I was kind of shaking my head like, where did this chick go? You know, she had such a great build-up, and some events happened that made her seem really important, you know? Overall, I prefer Atlas Shrugged. This is more dense, and certainly, of course, it's an extra 400 pages, but if I had to give you a recommendation, I'd recommend Atlas Shrugged over the Fountainhead. The Fountainhead is still awesome, but because I like political commentary a lot more, Atlas Shrugged is the way to go for me, right? If you like political commentary, go with Atlas Shrugged. If you like looking at individualism and then exploring that relationship with conformity, the Fountainhead is the hands-down way to go for you. I think that it still did a great job of just demonstrating that point, and while it's present in Atlas Shrugged, it was the focus really in the Fountainhead. Either way, both are great books, and I want to see what Grok says about both, just to see if there's other stuff I can touch on. Okay, so Grok is going to do a comparison of Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead, and I'll just do some quick commentary on it. Both novels champion objectivism, portraying individuals who reject collectivism and societal norms to pursue their own rational self-interest. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty true. Of course, like I've said, collectivism is way more strongly emphasized in Atlas Shrugged, and rational self-interest is much more strongly emphasized in Fountainhead, but both books have those elements. They critique altruism, government intervention, depicting societies that punish excellence and reward mediocrity. Totally true, way more emphasized in Atlas Shrugged, though. Actually, I would say both emphasize that quite a lot, but it's a little bit more emphasized in Atlas Shrugged. And the whole premise, there's a lot of that going on in the Fountainhead for sure. Protagonists are both idolized figures who embody Rand's vision of the heroic man, uncompromising, creative, and driven by reason. reason. Yep, like I said, it's impossible to hate the protagonists in both novels. Both explore the conflict between individualism and collectivism, with characters facing ostracism for their refusal to conform. Yep. The difference is Atlas Shrugged focuses on a broader societal corruption, how the producers withdraw from a world that exploits them, leading to economic and social decay. It's a dystopian allegory with a strong political economic lens, critiquing socialism and overregulation. The famous question, who is John Galt, symbolizes despair and resistance. The Fountainhead centers on personal integrity and creative individualism, using architecture as a metaphor. And that's really the case in Atlas Shrugged. They use trains. Howard Roark's struggle is more personal against mediocrity in art and culture rather than a systemic societal critique. It's less overtly political, focusing on the individual's battle to maintain artistic and moral purity. Plot and scope. I'll try to blow through this. Taggart, she owns Taggart Transcontinental, and there's increasing government control and societal decay. John Galt's mysterious, and he leads the strike of the mind, convincing the world's most productive individuals to withdraw their talents, causing civilization to crumble. A lot of that is really in part 3. Sprawling epic with 1,200 pages of narrative spanning multiple industries, railroad, steel, and oil, and a large cast of characters. It was mostly railroad. A second, of course, the silver medal goes to steel, because we see Reardon throughout much of the beginning of the novel. And oil, wasn't that like Wyatt or whoever, and that was like very, very tracely mentioned, and just kind of like a background thing going on. It's a systemic critique of society, blanket mystery, romance, and philosophical speeches. Yeah, Galt's... Okay. So here's the thing with Galt's speech. I was trying to... I knew that it was coming up in chapter 3 of part 3 in Atlas Shrugged. And so I thought I could just kind of speed read and blow through it. I read part 3 in 5 days, by the way. And when I was reading it, it was probably like 1:30 in the morning. I was like, okay, I want to be able to read in the morning and not have to deal with this speech. So what I'm going to do is just speed read through it. I got to page 28 of the 60 pages of the speech. And as I'm reading it, I'm in my bed, right? I have my book right here. I'm literally reading it. And I'm really fighting off sleep at this point, right? And I'm like, man, this 60 pages is going to be kind of a grind. I'm reading it, and I guess I fell asleep because for a second, the book hit me in the face, and I woke up and I was like, what the fuck was that, right? So I literally hit myself with the book, and I fell asleep reading John Galt's speech. So it's really not that riveting because it's very congruent to her whole philosophy, and she emphasizes it throughout the entire book. So it's not like it's completely new at that point, like 1,000 pages in, but it's definitely a grind. I'd say you could almost skip it, or at least just kind of skim through it, because a lot of it is pretty repetitive for what I remember. Howard Roark, a brilliant architect, refuses to compromise, facing opposition from conformists like Peter Keating and Ellsworth Toohey. Roark struggles to maintain his vision, culminating with a dramatic trial after he dynamites a housing project that was altered against his will. That is the very end of the book, and I think it's kind of BS. And that's what I was saying, right? Like, that's really kind of the climax, the one super climax of the book in the Fountainhead. Whereas in Atlas Shrugged, there were multiple times where you just kind of felt like, wow, this is like an important point, right? More focused, it's 700 pages, the plot is straightforward with more... This is like the most important part about the Fountainhead. The plot is more straightforward and is fewer characters with more linear progression, and that makes it much more accessible in Atlas Shrugged. I would totally agree with that. Okay, the protagonists are idealized, perfect man, yep. Antagonists represent collectivism and mediocrity, yep. Toohey in the Fountainhead, Taggart, and bureaucrats in Atlas Shrugged. I really like that aspect of Atlas Shrugged, by the way, because all the other bureaucrats like Orrin Boyle and all these kind of evil people are really like delved into a little bit more, because they're kind of recurring throughout the place. And it was especially true when they were I can't remember the exact part, but this is probably like part 2, maybe end of part 1, where they're kind of making maybe not that new constitution, but they're like passing a law that like makes things very, very unfair or something like that, and it basically just completely focuses on stealing or something like that. But we never really had too much of that in the Fountainhead. We had a lot more focus on that in the Atlas Shrugged, hence why it's like more political. Romantic relationships in both book pairing strong, independent characters, Roark and Dominique, and then Dagny and Galt. And then let's not forget about Dagny and Reardon. That was a pretty cool scene. So Atlas Shrugged, it's a cultural touchstone. Yeah, it's pretty important. Critically divisive. Praised for its bold ideas, but panned for its length, wooden characters, and preachy tone. I didn't feel like it was too preachy. It did get a little bit repetitive, but it's not nearly as repetitive as Leviathan and its enemies. That is like the king of repetitivity in a book. It has a 3.7 rating out of 5, and there was a shitty 3-part film, which really did not do that great. I tried to watch a little bit of it. It just seemed like it was a little bit too chaotic in like a very bad sense. The Fountainhead, also influential, particularly in architectural circles, inspiring real-world architects to pursue innovation. It has sold 6 million copies and often is seen as Rand's literary peak. Better received critically than Atlas Shrugged with 4 out of 5, and praised for its tighter narrative, though still criticized for Rand's heavy-handed philosophy. It really was not as heavy-handed in the Fountainhead, so that's probably why it's way less divisive. So actually, it's really ironic when you think about it, right? Because in the very beginning of the book with the Fountainhead, we have the scene where Roark is getting expelled, and then he's kind of like got some teachers who are fighting for him very, very strongly, and then there's some teachers who absolutely hate him. And it's almost kind of like, you can almost say that Rourke represents like the book in that sense, right? Because at the end of the day, you have like her philosophy that's put in both these books more or less, right? And the book is either really, really hated or it's like really, really backed up, right? So when you look at the faculty of that school, would they back up this book or this philosophy, so to speak, right? You're gonna have its super, super heavy critics like in society, and then you're gonna have its people that really, really like it, that would be kind of like those 2 or 3 professors that stood up for Rourke, right? Either way, Rourke kind of represents extreme philosophy, and it's like how extremely divisive it can be in society, because mainly some people would rather not be able to create things and steal things from others rather than creating things on their own and contributing. I never saw this. I thought about seeing it, but I don't know. Maybe you guys can let me know if this is good or not. Okay, and finishing it off, let's get to the pros and cons. Atlas Shrugged. It's an ambitious scope. It has influential ideas. And there is a mystery element. I think because in Atlas Shrugged there were more things going on, the mystery element was a little bit more powerful, so it kept me more engaged, right? For example, like, who's this Ragnar Deannaskold guy, right? I was like, oh man, he's in the newspaper, he's like raiding places, right? And he's like talked about as being terrible. I thought that was like super cool. Like, oh man, we're totally gonna meet this guy later on, right? The societal collapse narrative is gripping, especially for those interested in dystopian scenarios like The Last of Us. That's the show I've watched recently. For a show made in 2023, it's not bad. It does have some things I really hate about it, but honestly, I would give it like an 8.5, 9 out of 10. It's amazing that something made in the last few years has actually been good in television. Cons: excessive length. Yeah, this is by far like one of the biggest points. The slow pace of the Galt's speech is pretty brutal. I mean, like I told you, I literally fell asleep reading it. But the end of the book by far is like the best part of like Atlas Shrugged. I mean, part 3, I think my whole favorite scene in that entire book is when Hank Reardon is talking to, I don't know if it was Orrin Boyle or it was someone, but he basically said like, okay, you want me to turn off my furnaces, give you some of them so that you can make money, and then I have to produce it at a loss. And he's like, well, right, that's because you're like taking it from us. So I can't remember what it was, but that was like the best scene in the whole book for me. Unfortunately, it's all the way back at like 950 or 1,000 pages. But yeah, that's like the reality. One-dimensional characters, of course, protagonists are idealized and antagonists are caricatured, lacking depth. Yeah, like I've seen this criticism before where, you know, the evil people in Atlas Shrugged are just so easy to hate because they're just such bad people, right? Like, oh, they're the evildoers. We must hate them no matter what. There's no depth to their character. Didactic tone, the heavy-handed philosophizing alienates readers who prefer subtlety, as noted in Goodreads reviews. Yep, or if you just want subtlety, you go with the Fountainhead. Polarization. Don't even have to talk about this. It is like super polarizing next, right? Fountainhead, 700 pages. It's better, right? Strong protagonist, of course, who could hate Howard Rourke. Architectural metaphor. The focus of the architecture as a symbol of individualism is unique and emotionally resilient, especially for creative readers. Definitely the case with Taggart, Transcontinental, and Atlas Shrugged, right? Better writing. It's more polished and less preachy, making it more literary experience than Atlas Shrugged. I don't know how I feel about that. Unrealistic characters, Rourke's perfection, and Dominique's masochistic behavior can feel implausible. Totally the case with Dominique. That's why I had a harder time understanding her as I did in my book review last week. Limited scope. Lacks the societal breadth of Atlas Shrugged, focusing on more personal rather than systemic struggles, which may disappoint readers seeking a broader critique. Yeah, that's what I found a little bit disappointed about the Fountainhead, because like I told you guys, I read Atlas Shrugged first and then went to the Fountainhead, so I'm expecting like the Fountainhead to be like just as much of a societal critiquer as Atlas Shrugged was, but it wasn't. I'm glad it was different, but I definitely thought it was going to be like guns firing the whole time, kind of like Atlas Shrugged was. And so if you go from the Fountainhead and you switch to Atlas Shrugged, you're probably going to find that to be the case. Like, you kind of get this kind of subtle stories talking about individualism, of course, but then you in the Atlas Shrugged, you just find this like government like falling apart and make the rich people do everything rather than try to contribute and fix the problem. And so you get this really, really harsh critique, whereas like in the Fountainhead, it's very subtle. You're just like, where did that come from, right? Still heavy on objectivism, which can feel dated or overly simplistic in its rejection of altruism. The 1940s setting and gender dynamics may not resonate with modern readers. You know, I find that to be bullshit, and here's why. I really, really liked Dagny Taggart as the main character of Atlas Shrugged. I thought she was awesome, impossible character to hate, and I don't give a fuck. If you write a character that's that strong, that's fine with me. Here's the problem, right? When we look at the 1940s and the gender roles back then, you have to understand that is how society had run, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's how it was back then, right? We can't go back 700 years and make people start taking showers. Like, that is just how society ran with the information they had, right? So the fact that it's offensive to anyone that like, oh my god, it's like 80 years ago, but they still had, it's like, no shit, Sherlock, that's what they did back then. It's no different than the 1500s or the 500s or like 3000 BC. That's the way they did things back then, right? And of course, we try to change things and make it better, But realistically, shouldn't we just have those gender dynamics anyway back then? I mean, look at society. It's kind of falling apart, right? Anyway, I know that if you're viewing this YouTube channel, you're not someone who needs to be told this, but it's always laughable when they're like so outraged at something that was like 80 or 100 years ago or more. And it's like, well, you know, maybe the society that you were born into is just a little bit different than the society that was going on back then. Look at the dumb shit we do today, and in 70 years, they're probably going to look back and be like, God, you guys were retarded in 2025. Anyway, like I said, both books are awesome. If you've read one, you should probably just read the other. It's just under 2,000 pages between both of them, but it's well worth it and highly rewarding, and will probably change your life, to be honest. If we could give this book to everyone and make them read it, of course, not everyone's going to agree with it, and it's going to be very polarized, but the people who resonate with the message of the book will be that much stronger because they can be so much more convicted of their beliefs. It's so much easier to affirm something you know when you see it somewhere else. And so, like myself, it's kind of like, yeah, I know this, but, you know, I don't know exactly what to do with that. When the book today is like, okay, you do this, you say, fuck the government, you don't compromise, you're like, okay, that's easier for me to do now, right? Because I know someone else can do it, I can do it too. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know which one you preferred in the comments, and let me know which one you read first, and if that influenced your decision.